I'm from Wild Eye, and this is episode 11 of our wildlife photography Q&A video series. Now, if you've just joined, the idea is you ask questions, I answer them, anything to do with wildlife photography, and today specifically we're looking at Lightroom related questions. Not only discussion questions, but also I'm going to jump into Lightroom, and remember, this is not full tutorials for this episode, it's little chunks and snippets of information based on the questions you asked. Now, before we get going, what is Lightroom? Lightroom is a processing piece of software made by Adobe, the same guys who do Photoshop. Now, imagine if you will, Lightroom is a vehicle, Photoshop is a vehicle, you park them next to each other. Now you walk around to the front, you open the hood, the bonnet on those things, and you're going to find that the processing power, the engine size, the strength of the program is exactly the same. Yeah, that's important. However, Lightroom is a much more sexier, smoother user experience, and we like sexy, yeah? So, Lightroom is designed for, by, and with photographers in mind, whereas Photoshop has a lot of stuff you never should need to use for your wildlife photography. Let's start off here. You can't polish a turd, yeah? You're not going to create a crappy image and then Photoshop it better. It doesn't work. It's going to be visible. Also, you're a photographer. You don't want to be stuck behind a computer all day, half an hour on an image, trying to fix stuff up. So, I'm in the Lightroom corner 100%. Yes, I do still have a use for Photoshop once in a while, but the majority of my work, and the guys in the office at the Wild Eye office here, also work on Lightroom because it's easy and hell of a powerful. So, with all of that said, let's have a look at your Lightroom questions.
Anand on email. Can you explain the basics of Lightroom?
Anand, I took this one as the first one purely because the question itself lends it to me having a quick look through the basic panel in Lightroom, what it does. Now, remember in the old days, you would shoot on film, yeah? You would take, after you finish shooting, you would reverse or rewind that roll of film, take it out. You would take that film, i.e. your raw files, to a guy at the corner who ran the little photo studio. He would then process them for you, and you would go and fetch your final images, i.e. your JPEGs. That's what we're doing with processing. You're taking it from a raw data stage, i.e. your film, which you can't use for anything, process it, the old man in his photo studio that did all of that stuff, this is Lightroom now, and then you get your final printed image, your final image, i.e. your JPEG. That's the basics, Anand, of Lightroom. That's the goal. Now, for wildlife photography, we need to try and keep it natural. And I'm a big believer in this. Cloning stuff out and changing orientation, all of these things. We want to show people what we saw in the field. So natural. That's kind of the umbrella that I keep over all of my Lightroom work. So, with that in mind, the basics of Lightroom, for me, is in the basic panel. Check this out. So, what we have here now is the basic panel within Lightroom, top to bottom. White balance is literally just what it says. You can either change white balance in camera, or then you can do it after the fact. So, warming it up, cooling it down, exactly the same thing. Exposure, this is the same as if you were to go in your camera and dial in over or under exposure, yeah? All the way over, all the way under. You can create this up to a certain point in camera, remember. One small thing on this, remember guys, if you are over and under exposing, if you were to, for example, if you were to overexpose by say +2, Lightroom over here is not going to show you +2 on your raw file. It's important. You have to keep it in mind. It'll look like that from a +2 point of view, but it's going to say 0. Just something to keep in mind if you do that. Contrast is the same thing. We spoke about this earlier in one of the previous episodes. What contrast is, if you increase contrast, you make your darks darker, your lights lighter, so it punches the image more. In the same breath, decrease contrast, it makes your darks lighter and your lights darker, leaving a slightly more washed out image. Now, these 4 sliders over here are extremely powerful for us to use. You need to understand the histogram, however. The blacks, if you watch my histogram at the top here, holding over blacks, that's the area that's affected. So I'm looking at the very deep, dark areas of the image. You can see that punches a little bit, yeah? The white slider controls, look at the histogram that lights up. The white's at the top, so I can create a white point. Shadows then it's in the previous versions of Lightroom, it used to be called full light. Now what you do there is, it doesn't affect the pitch black, but the darker areas you can lighten up. Careful of it though, because it's very easy to overdo. And in the same breath, highlights will not take the pure white areas. it'll take, for example, the brighter areas in the image and make them even brighter still or darker. So you can see the top part there being punched. Be careful of taking this to the extreme. Then, present. Clarity is not sharpness, but it gives you a sharpness effect. What it does is on the edges of the image, for example, on the edge of the ear here, it will increase the contrast around that edge, and that's how it works. So it gives you the idea of sharpening, but remember, every action has an opposite but equal, or sometimes just very strange, reaction. And that's based on, if it's going to get darker and darker around the edges, you're going to have to check your blacks and highlights, shadows later on, because clarity will affect those. So if you do something in clarity, make sure you're jumping around. Alright? Vibrant, now, okay, saturation, first of all, takes every single color in the image and bumps it up. Looks heavy. Or then, if you take it all the way down, it desaturates it completely. Vibrance, over here, is very, very clever in that Lightroom looks at, through a series of very clever algorithms, which colors are missing in that frame, and they get punched up first. So you can get away with a lot. I mean, if that's my max on vibrance, this is the max on saturation. You can see saturation is stronger. For wildlife, between 5 and 10 on vibrance almost every single time, you'll be well on your way. So for me, this is the basics of Lightroom. If you cannot get out of that basic panel with a reasonable amount of, what's the word I'm looking for here? Not a reasonable amount, a decent image. There's no point you trying to use brushes and all kinds of other crap to try and fix it. Then you have a problem. This is the basics. Do it right in camera, then use this basic panel to tweak it and to get everything out. Remember, a raw file is just data. That's why, think about this. If you're looking at the image on the back of your camera in the field, when you chip, yeah? Or when you chip, the image you're looking at is a JPEG version of the raw file, because a raw file cannot be shown. It's just a bunch of numbers. Same thing, when you open up your Lightroom, I'm sure you guys would have seen this, is when the images are loading, it looks all bright and happy, and then suddenly it like pops and becomes dark. That's because Lightroom shows you the JPEG version while it's processing and getting ready to show you your raw version, which looks flat. That's why you have to process it. Next question we'll raise up from there then is, why would I shoot in RAW if it's all this work? Because I don't like the idea, and you shouldn't either, of the camera deciding how to process that image. And that's what happens when you shoot JPEG. Rather shoot in RAW, get all the information, and then, Anand, use those basic sliders like we flew through now to get your image, to pull the most out of the image, to create a natural looking image. Now, that's the basics, and I mean, that's me flying. We're going to cover some other things in here now as well. If you have any more questions, keep them coming, because that's why I'm here. And we can look at each slider individually. But the basics of Lightroom, there you have it.
Kim on Instagram. Since I'm learning Lightroom, I know next to nothing about cropping photos. Can you give me some tips and pointers on good crops versus bad crops?
Kim, very, very good question, because there's, to me, the general approach I have to processing, and it's a nice way for you to maybe pick up on as well, is get your canvas ready first. This is now after the shooting, yeah? Once you've imported your images, get your canvas ready first, i.e. remove dust spots, because that's just no excuse, straighten the horizon if necessary, and then crop your canvas so you know what you're finally working with. Because and then start doing the basics, which we answered in the previous question. Once your canvas is ready, you know what you're working with. You know, for example, there might be a very bright spot at the top of your frame, which you're going to try and fix later on in processing. But if you've cropped it out, you know what you're working with. Right. So from a crop point of view, it's not just, what I'm trying to say here? It's not just how you want to crop. It's the story you want to tell. It comes back to you as the visual storyteller. The moment I present an image in a landscape orientation, like you're looking at me now, that means to my viewer, they need to read the image side to side. The visual energy in that image frame is going to go side to side, yes? If I present it in a portrait orientation, I'm telling my reader, the visual reader of my frame, the energy is going to go up and down. So I'm not going to have, for example, an animal running across a frame and present it as this, yeah? There's a time and a place to break those rules, but these are just the guidelines. So, with crop, check this out. So we'll work on the same little Ellie. It's a small guy I took in Kenya a couple of weeks ago. So crop-wise, to enter crop, R key takes me straight in there. And then, for those of you that haven't watched some of my other videos, why not? But here's the thing. If this padlock is open, you can crop free. You can do any kind of orientation that you want. This padlock is closed. It sticks to the orientation set over here. Right, so for me, Kim, couple of things, cropping-wise, ideas. This is in the frame, this butt, I don't want that, so I would immediately chop that off. Then reassess, right, what have I got here? Scan the outside of my frame. This top part of the sky now will draw my viewer's attention up, and I don't want that. I want them to kind of stick to the ellie. I don't want them to go out. So I'd bring it in a touch more, and then look at repositioning, and enter gives me that. That already is a much, and now look again, I will go around the frame again, I'll see this tree coming in, which the tree's there, I can't change that, I'm not going to clone stuff out, but I would just drop it out there. That's a much cleaner image based on just this little guy. Right, he's moving, we can see this to the left, but, so I'm not going to try and chop it off over, if I open my padlock here, the shortcut for that is A, by the way. I'm not going to do him over here because for me, he's moving to the left. So I want to give him space to move into. That's the kind of stories we tell. Let's look, for example, I'm going to jump quickly. I just downloaded a couple of images that you guys sent me that we're going to play with. These two images, I think this is Richard's images, yeah? So those two, for example, the one on the right, what would I do there? I would scan the outside of the frame. Yeah, I would scan the frame and see what I could do with this. Now, I like the idea of having space in front of the animal here because if you're looking at the frame and there's space at the bottom, it gives me the feeling as the viewer that I'm looking at this animal from a low angle and there's distance between us. It's visual storytelling, it's common sense. It's how people psychologically reads images. You can't change this, it's how it is. So on this one, for example, if I had to crop this up to there, it becomes a lot friendlier image. Yeah? There's no distance he needs to cover, it's just a wildlife image. Think of the distance you use. So cropping wise, that for me, I would keep this. Rich, if you're watching this, I would keep this there as well. In this case, I wouldn't do too much of a crop because as I'm scanning the outsides of the frame, nothing really bothers me. Nothing's peeking in that I need to get rid of. If we go to the other shot, Rich, this is yours as well. We're going to look at these in a little bit. What I like here, now this animal's staring straight at me, but the visual energy in the frame, he's looking at me is going side to side. Yeah? It's nice to see the animal in its environment. So, if I'm going to enhance this, what I could like, I'm liking 16:9 as an orientation because it shows well on mobile and all those places. I would tighten this up like that. That to me makes a more intimate image of this animal with a side-to-side energy flow in it. So, that's just some ideas on cropping, Kim. So, what you look at is two questions to yourself. Number one, you ask is, when you're looking at the frame before you start cropping, is the energy in this frame, the story, is it a side-to-side story or is it an up and down story? Yeah? How do you read the image? Which way is your eyes going to go? Up and down, side to side. And that's the orientation you're going to start with. Second of all, scan the outside of the frame, and if there's anything that does not belong there or that doesn't add to the story, actually that doesn't subtract from that story, then get rid of it. Yeah? So if there's a branch popping in, try and crop it out. I would also, just to wrap up the question on cropping, is I would be hesitant to go freestyle and just crop very skinny or very random stuff. Try and stick to the original ratio as much as possible or go to given things like 5:7, 16:9 because they're usable. Yeah? It's very difficult. And look, there's a time and a place again. If you're going to make a nice print for your wall, long, skinny print, absolutely, crop it skinny. But for general use, for publications, for websites, for things like this, keep the original ratio intact as much as possible. At the end of the day, again, with everything in Lightroom, cropping is a personal choice. Those are guidelines. Use them, don't use them.
Richard asked on email, what I'm basically battling with is what to do to an image in Lightroom, keeping it as natural as possible. Adjustment brush, basic principles.
Okay, Richard, this is probably a question every single wildlife photographer out there should be asking themselves is how do I process my images and keep it natural at the same time? Now, we're not talking, watch episode 12, fine art prints or stuff you do creatively or black and white or whatever. We're talking a natural history type image. This is what I saw. If you were next to me, that's what you would see. So the images, the question you ask revolves around how do I get this natural looking? Adjustment brush or basic principles? Basic principles for me would be basic panel in Lightroom. Work through that as much as you can to get as close. Now remember, there's also a certain amount of you as the artist, because wildlife photography is not, yeah? You as the artist interpreting a scene. So the saturation may be up a little bit, or down a little bit, or whatever, slightly darker, brighter. There is a certain amount of artistic element to it, which is fantastic. But from a natural point of view, stick to the basic panel before you rush off into the adjustment brush. Yeah? And then, yeah, there's a place for adjustment brushes. Take this link up here. Yep, follow that and go watch one of the adjustment brush videos. That will help quite a bit. For now, let's look at the image you sent in. I'm looking at one rhino image specifically and get it to look natural. Let's go. So the one I'm going to look at here, we saw these earlier on, is this one over here, into the develop panel. Now, this is the raw file as shot. First of all, if we look at the histogram, there's no pure black, there's no pure white. I want to fix that off the bat. I hold black, I click Alt, I drop it down until either you can watch the histogram, it touches the side, or until I get some speckles coming through and I release over there. I do the same thing with white. Go up, 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 and drop it back a bit, release. Now, if I put it before and after, there's punch already. That is already, almost looks slightly overcast here. Richard, I don't know, you missed something. Was this overcast? Yeah? So it's almost better already. Now, I can say, right, this is a very dark area up here which draws my eye away from the animal. Punch it up a little bit. Raise the shadows. Just a guideline, guys, while I've got this shadows slider here. I see a lot of you guys, both on safaris and when you're sending me images and stuff, you're taking the shadows and the highlight sliders to 100%. No. Try and rather work a balance of exposure, contrast, blacks and white sliders before, because if you have to max out on anything in Lightroom, there's a problem to start with. And it becomes very evident. I mean, look at this image here. If I do that, that looks unnatural. There is no shadows and stuff in this image. So careful of going. I would hesitate to take my highlights and shadows more than 50 either way. Rather play with exposure, tweak your black and white. Play with exposure again, tweak your black and white, and then fine tune with highlights and shadows. Don't try and fix shitty errors by diving straight in there. Anyway, back we go. So I'm going to probably look at about a 20, 25 on this one. Let's compare before and after. Now that's already quite decent. Clarity-wise, I like to give it about a 5 clarity. It just gives a little bit of punch, yeah? Vibrance on this, I'm finding the green quite strong. So I would go punch vibrance overall to get some color. And watch this now. I'm going to drop my saturation down a bit. Because I know the grass, this kind of grass in the bush, I think you said Infillosi and stuff, you saw this as. It's not that bright green, unless it's very new and very, but I can see this is not. That to me is a pretty decent start to get a natural looking image. From a brush point of view, what I would like to do now, I'm only doing this because personally I wouldn't actually take this any further. But because you asked the question, let's go. I would take this brush now and I would go reset my brush. I would then maybe okay, I've got 0 on. I'm going to paint just my rhino. I can use an overlay to see, why is this coming up there now? Make it crack. I'm going to get out the way. I must have hit a key somewhere while talking to you. So I'm going to brush this guy, and then, if anything, I'm just going to punch clarity a little bit, maybe sharpness, and sometimes just lift the shadows locally on the animal. That to me, if I look at those two now, let me give you a bigger view there. That to me, Richard, so you had a decent raw file to start with, but then there's my final result. Keep it natural. Stick to the basic panel as much as you can, and then only go into the brushes and stuff. Easy enough to kind of play with that there, but overall, that for me would be an easy one to play with. Now, I think that's all the questions you had, Richard. You sent other images through as well. I'm going to try and do, when I find some time, do some isolated Lightroom videos on them because I can dig into it a bit more. For now, that's how I would keep it natural. Basic principle, stick to basic panel, and then just fine tune with shadows, highlights, and the brush. Hope that helps.
Alyssa asked on email, I would like to see how you would process this image. There is a problem in the image I struggle to solve. What I would like to improve is the area on the right from the snake.
Right, Alyssa, the reason I took this particular question of yours and this particular image is because I think as wildlife photographers sometimes, and especially with the processing thereof, we overthink things. We go and why this is, hell only knows. I don't know if it's we compare ourselves to what we see out there. We It's maybe a spillover from things like wedding and fashion photography where we have to process things to perfection. Wildlife photography is not always perfect. It's almost like the things that we miss, the small bits and pieces that we don't fix gives it a raw and natural element, which is a nice thing. So, your question is, how do you process this particular image? I'm going to show it to you now. And obviously it's raw, so there's dust spots. We'll quickly take those out. But then how do you fix the area to the right of the snake? Check this out. So, this is our image. Dust spots, first of all, I mean, this is raw, so we all have dust spots. It's a natural thing. Do you guys know how to check for dust spots? That's another one. Ask me the question. I'll answer it in a future episode. Right. Taking dust spots out here. Let's just another one little here. Okay. Now, would I remove this thing at the top? No, because I'm going to crop this thing anyway. So, like we said in the previous question about cropping, the idea here, my visual energy runs definitely from left to right. So to enhance that feeling, first of all, I would crop this, again, my 16 by 9, and I would lose this piece of thing at the back, that grass or whatever it was. Something like that, to me, works quite well as a crop. Makes it intimate, and there's a beautiful diagonal line created by that snake. Now, the area, let's quickly just do very similar to what we did with Richard's image. Maybe just there. Okay, so we've just punched it a little bit. We're focusing on the area to the right of snake, so this is just a quick one. Now, what I would do, the area you're talking about, Alyssa, I'm assuming is this big white spot over here. Now, the idea of overthinking images comes in here because to me, I like the dappled light. I think in an image like this, it actually creates the illusion of depth, of foliage. Your mind looks at this and your mind will run away with it. That means there's light coming through things. The secret of nature, maybe I'm taking this too far, but the secret of nature of the snake means it's hiding in stuff. That kind of light, as a very, very deep down subconscious thing, tells me that's where he is. Yeah? But let's fix it and then we'll get back on that. So, how you would go about this, all of these basic adjustments, Anant, if you're still watching, basic adjustments is global. It affects the entire frame. Yeah? The moment I want to select an area, I would need to go to the brush, zero it in. So I don't always use overlay mask, but I would do an overlay mask and just paint this area that we worried about, the area to the right of the snake. Yeah? I'll take my overlay mask away, look at it, and then I can do adjust as needed. So this is not shadow. So I would take my exposure down a bit maybe, and then highlights, because it's in highlight area, drop it in a bit. Right. Now, if I look at that, it is more natural. Let's turn it on and off. Yeah? So there's your blend. So there it gets rid of the edge on it. I can then go and right-click on there and duplicate that thing again and see if now, to me, it feels natural. Now I can tweak. So what I'm doing now, I'm working two brushes literally on top of each other. Think Photoshop layering. This is it. Same thing. So I can then go and tweak this as well. So what we've done with those brushes, Alyssa, is that it's not as strong, but it is still there. So you have to think for yourself, are we overthinking these things in that we have to try and fix everything in the frame? Yeah, dust spots get rid of. Skew horizon, fix that thing immediately, and then crop your canvas. But the rest of it, when you were there, put it this way, if you were there, you took the image. But sitting there looking at that scene through your own eyes, was there that bright spot? Yes, there probably was. Yeah? The only problem is, while you're looking at the scene, you're not saying to yourself, oh, I have to fix that for it to look better. You're just looking at the scene and photographing that scene. So that's how you would fix it. And look, looking at it now, it could possibly work, maybe just a little bit less. But like I said, I quite like the idea of having that little bit of contrast in the background, a little bit of lights and darks. It gives me the illusion of depth. Depth is one of the most difficult things to create in a wildlife image because the camera compresses 3 dimensions into 2. We only have side and up. So, for example, on your image here, this rock in the front, the out of focus rock, is a beautiful way of creating depth because I can see the snake is behind it. That dappled background you have there adds to that feeling to me as well. But there you have it. That's how you would take it away and fix the area to the right of the snake, but don't get rid of it completely. I think it still works.
Carol on email. Regarding black and white, I'm finding it very difficult to use split toning. Can you give a bit of info on these, please?
Right, Carol, I like this question because I'm going to take it in 2 directions. You ask about black and white and split toning. Now, first of all, split toning is not black and white. For those of you not familiar, let's just jump back into Lightroom over here And if I look, I'm going to let's take Rich's image from earlier on, take that back, and we'll keep all the adjustments we made earlier on. So if I look underneath black, I've got HSL color, black and white, and then split toning. Split toning is something very different that you can do to create, for example, sepia type images. You can also, as a very advanced technique, you can add a bit of warmth or coolness to certain areas of the image. Before we get there, when you create a black and white, you don't do it there. You do it over here. Watch this. You're going to scroll down to B and W, which is black and white, obviously. Now, you can either hit V, which takes you and gives you a preview of it. Now, please, don't stop here and save it as a fine art print. Yeah, we're going there again. That is, if you do this, everybody's stuff's going to look the same. And you don't want to be the same. The moment you take color away, you've changed the image and you have to, as the artist, create something from it. So V just gives you the preview of what it would look like. Then click on black and white and it'll open this panel for you, the black and white mixer. Now, this is how you create proper black and white. Let's see if this image works. Lightroom calculates the black and white based on the color values in the image, for example. And this is why I like to, when I do black and whites, work on a before and after view, because now I can look on the left-hand side and see, right, there's the green areas, there's a bit of brown, and there's like probably some blues and stuff in this animal, right? So if I want to affect the green areas, so the areas around the rhino in my black and white image, I would take that green slider and I would work that, yeah, to whatever level you want. If you then want to, let's say for example, there's a little bit of browns coming through here, I would go and look, it's like a reddy orange color, and you can see it'll only affect those areas, yeah? So when you're doing black and white, hit V to preview it. If it doesn't work, move on. If it does work, go into the black and white panel and then work. Let me find an image that's got more color in it. You see, I just pulled some images that you guys sent me, but let's look at something else. Something with color, more color. I need blues and greens. This will work. Take that across. So again, we hit V, check it out. It looks flat still now. Give my before and after view. Now I can see, right, green is this area in the middle. The green channel will work that to your liking. Blue's up at the top, so let's go to the blue, and that'll work those areas. So let's say I want dark, dramatic. I've got reds, oranges, and greens in this area here. So my oranges, I would work, it's a neon cat. It's like a nuclear cat. He's glowing. And then I would go, and I could find and then work the rest. Yeah? So once you then get to a place that you have a very rough black and white, Carol, that's the point for you that I would take this to split toning. Now remember, I think, how long ago were you in Tuli with us? It must be about 3 years, 2 years, 3 years. You did your entire portfolio for that trip in black and white. I would go and revisit that. Take this newfound knowledge of split toning and apply it to some of those. Watch this. So I now go, once I've finished my black and white, I would go into split toning. You've got two sliders, two sections here, highlights and shadows. Look at your image. What is the most prevalent area? What is there more of, highlights or shadows? And for me, this is quite a dark image. So I would work on the shadow slider. The first slider here gives me the type of color I'm going to add. So around about between 40 and 50 is your typical sepia type tones. You choose the color. You can also do it by clicking this button over here and select your color. Then you dial up the saturation. So I'm going to overdo it. What that does, yeah, split toning, either on the shadows or on the highlights, it adds the type of color that you choose in those color pickers. It adds very softly to either the shadows or the highlights, yeah? So that's the first step. You can now, and this is where split 2 comes in. You can now go and say, right, let's choose a very different, let's choose like a blue and add that in. So what happens now is, to the shadow areas, I'm adding a sepia, the orangey type color, this type color over here, and to the highlights, I'm adding blue. And you get these duotone or split tone images. That's how split toning works. You can go and mess around with that on a color image. It becomes messy, but that's a more advanced tutorial we can do another time. So, Carol, black and white is not split toning. Split toning sits on top of black and white. Black and white, hit V, go in, work on the two colors. Color on the one side, black and white, so you can see which channels to move. And then when you have a final image, that's when you put split toning on top of it. Very, very handy and nice to play with. Sure, there was actually a lot of info in that little section. Go and watch it again. So, black and white, very nice. But just remember again, please guys, don't just hit V and save as my black and white. Take a little pride and time in your own work and go and work those individual color channels. It will look better. Right guys, there you go. Episode 13, the Lightroom episode. Now, I'm going to give you a quick question of the day here based on what you've just seen and the kind of thing that we can do with this. Question of the day to you is, do you want to do another Lightroom episode in future? It's a simple yes or no. Leave me a comment and then we'll make a plan maybe for next week or the week after. Right, it's Wednesday today. This is going to go up later today. Next episode coming up on Friday. We're back to normal Q&A on wildlife photography. If you have a question on wildlife photography, what to pack, what gear to get, but go deeper. Don't say, I want to take pictures of a lion, what gear must I get? That's a shitty question. Go deeper. I'm going to go to the Masai Mara. I want to try and get images of cats. What lenses do you recommend? Or what techniques, what settings will take my images to the next step, whatever. Look deeper than just the obvious and let's answer them for you. It's not just me. I've got the whole team here, Andrew, Marlon, John O'Penny, everybody's in the office. If you have a question for either me or any of the team, the details are at the end of this video. Give us a shout and we will keep on answering those wildlife photography questions for you. My name is Gerry. I'm from Wild Eye. I will see you next time.